Come on, you're theater people. You know you're going to be made to do that again. Good evening. Excellent. On behalf of, oh yeah, applause is great. Yay! Celebration, theater, arts, nonprofit radio. What is better than that? So on behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, I'd like to welcome you to the Crawford Family Forum. By a show of hands, how many people tonight are visiting us for the first time? Excellent, excellent. Well, welcome. For those of you returning, thank you. For those of you new, even more. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'd like to say that the Crawford Family Forum is the physical manifestation of KPCC's public service mission. It's our in-person platform. Our first platform is broadcast, 89.3 FM on the dial. Anybody heard of that station? Great. NPR affiliate, 3 daily produced original shows, and then we have off-ramp on the weekend in addition to NPR programming. Our second platform we think of as kpcc.org, our comprehensive digital news service. So if you miss Air Talk or Pat Morrison or the Madeline Brand Show, you can go online, listen to it then, no problem. But we also have stuff unique to the web, unique digital news features, comprehensive content, videos, all kinds of stuff, and then Twitter and Facebook and all that social media stuff. So there's a lot going on. And then the third platform, Crawford Family Forum, is sort of the mainstay of our in-person content. So, by a show of hands, how many people are KPCC members? Excellent. Well, thank you. If you're not a member, 866-888-5722 or online, kpcc.org/support if you want to check that out. Got to get that in there. I'm obligated. So one of the things we do in here, we like to work with our talk shows, other content platforms organizationally, but one of the outstanding opportunities that this space has yielded is an opportunity to partner with different organizations out in the community. Tonight, what you have come to see is a great, wonderful example of a partnership that's sort of continued to grow over 2 years. So we're thrilled to be hosting LA Stage Alliance for tonight's program. To talk to you a little bit more about that, introduce Terence McFarland, the CEO of LA Stage Alliance and the moderator of tonight's program. Terence.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Hey, everybody. Welcome. First of all, I want to thank Southern California Public Radio and specifically John Kahn and Jenny Smith for hosting us and taking such good care of us. They've been fantastic to work with. We wouldn't be here without our sponsors: the James Irvine Foundation, the LA County Arts Commission, Schubert Foundation, Department of Cultural Affairs, City of Los Angeles, California Community Foundation, the Biller Family Foundation, and the California Arts Council, who all support us with general operating support, and we thank them for that. Crystal has advised me, please fill out your surveys when you leave. Please fill out your surveys when you leave. Awesome. There are pencils there, right? We need to report back to the funders that we had a lively conversation. We'd love your feedback. We'd like to improve this as we move forward throughout the LA Stage Talks series. So what is LA Stage Talks? LA Stage Alliance is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to building awareness, appreciation, and support for the performing arts in Greater LA. We like to say that we empower artists and engage audiences. And we realized we were sort of uniquely situated to have a dialogue that spanned outside the boundaries of one organization, but we could bring lots of different people together to talk about topics that maybe happen in the car ride home or in the rehearsal room. And our goal with this series was really to kind of get a glimpse behind the scenes of the performing arts community, and specifically tonight, the theater community and arts criticism. A lively topic. Hopefully it will be an engaging conversation, and we hope that you all will take part. One of the things we want to point out, tonight is not a conversation about using arts criticism and reviews to fill the house. This isn't a marketing conversation. We talk about marketing quite a bit at LA Stage Alliance. Tonight is more a broader context, a wider frame, if you will. I'll try to police that as we go along, but I know our panelists will be engaged in a much broader frame around that. This is the second in our series of LA Stage Talks. The next will be Monday, May 14th at 7 with the title, Why Are Theater Makers the Masters of Collaboration? It's going to be hosted by the LA County Arts Commission and the Ford Theaters at Inside the Ford. And it'll be a dialogue about the collaboration between directors and designers. And I'm sure it will be another incredible conversation. We're live streaming today's event. Hello, online community over there. And I want to thank Bakersman Productions for always being so quick and responsive to our needs. Thank you for that. The video of this event will be made available on our homepage at LA Stage Alliance. We are also taking questions via Twitter, hashtag LA Stage Talks for those tweeters in the audience. And also for you live streamers, we will be taking questions from the chat box. Mark will be sending them up to me. We're very interactive here at LA Stage Alliance. Very social media aware, we like to think. But you'll let us know in our surveys. There will be time for a live Q&A at the end. If you have sort of like a clarifying question, if somebody says something and you sort of don't understand the concept or need a specific clarification, raise your hand. I'll be happy to call on you. But otherwise, we're going to keep the questions till the end of the conversation. So I'd love to, with that, introduce our panelists. We have award-winning actress Deidrie Henry in the second chair. LA Weekly Critic-at-large Stephen Lee Morris. Educator, poet, and critic Francis Baum Nicholson. On the far side, LA Stage Watch columnist and longtime advocate for LA theater, Don Shirley. And head of the Writing for Performance program at California Institute of the Arts, and playwright Alice Tuan. So to start us off, I think it's always important to define our terms. And so I'm going to toss to our panelists, if you can talk about the distinction between reviews and criticism. And anyone can start.
Is this on? Yes. I think of reviews as individual reports on a particular show. I think of criticism as a broader view of the entire theatrical ecology in our community.
When I tend to think of the two terms, I'm kind of a literalist, I guess. I think of criticism as being more likely to focus on the tearing down than the building up. And I find a review, for me, when I consider my stuff to be reviews, to be more analytical, in a way that is not specifically engaged in the process of trying to tear things down, but more to try and explain to the audience that I have what it is they'd be looking at and what are the things I feel both positive and negative about it, so they can judge for themselves whether that is something that matters to them one way or the other. But it's more that analytical piece than critique. To me, often ends up being critical and to the exclusion of all else, and that's not appropriate. And it doesn't say enough sometimes about what it is the person writing the criticism is actually seeing and engaging in. So I guess I say that's just my literal way of taking it.
And I think just on the very pedestrian level, I see a review, I read a review before I go to see something, and I read a critique after I've seen it. So that usually is how that's how I define it. I don't necessarily want to have someone tear it down before I get to form my own opinion.
I think a theater event is like a house, and you're invited as an audience into a house. And then a reviewer takes a look at the wallpaper and says, I like the pattern, I don't like the pattern. Whereas a critic takes a look at the way the thing was built, why it was built the way it was. Maybe there was a river that ran there that's now dried up, maybe 50 years ago, and that's why they had to construct the house the way it was. So it puts the whole house in context, and that's criticism to me.
Can I take my definition back?
And we've begun.
I think that a review is more is talking more towards entertainment, go or don't go. Mm-hmm. And then a critique is more engagement, and I agree with Stephen. It's about context. It's about a frame, possibly talking about the essence of a piece, and then perhaps relating the execution of the production and the performances to it.
Yes.
I'm reminded to send apologies from Sasha Anawalt, who was scheduled to appear. She's tending to a family emergency on the East Coast. But I'm reminded because she pointed me to John Lahr's keynote speech from the USC NEA Arts Journalism fellowship in 2007, and one of the things that stood out from there's a video online if you're interested, but she pointed me to that as reference for tonight. And one of the things John Lars said in that was criticism makes meaning, and reviews make judgment. And it was really helpful for me in kind of thinking about today's conversation. This is more for the writers, but if the artists are interested in talking as well, when you're working in this field, who is the audience? Who are you writing for?
Go ahead. Thanks. I just think it depends on what we're reviewing. If we're reviewing Billy Elliot, my knees start to quake, and because that's being read perhaps across the country by Billy Elliot fans and the Billy Elliot marketing department. If it's a production at Antaeus or Sacred Fools, it's a very different readership, because the people who would read the review of Billy Elliot are simply not going to check in, or probably won't, for reasons that are beyond all of our control. So I think it really depends on, it depends is the answer.
My readership is changing somewhat now that I have an online presence, but for most of my career, I have written for suburban LA dailies. And when you're doing that, you're really, in many cases, doing a combination of educating people about theater and trying to give them the framework and, in some cases, the vocabulary to experience new things. So I tend to write with my local audience in mind. I remember one time a previous boss actually decided that she was going to write the review for, I mean, this is long ago, for Sweeney Todd. And so I just went to go see it and came away and said to my companion, this is one of the best musicals I've seen in a long time, and nobody that I write for wants to go see it. And it was one of those things where you're constantly having to temper it with the particular audience that my newspapers have. But now that I'm writing for a blog that does have more universal, where you find that the publicist for Billy Elliot is looking at it, I find sometimes I temper my sort of, let me explain what this is to you, because otherwise you may not understand it thing that I would do for the people who ordinarily read my stuff. So it's a kind of a balance.
My experience is somewhat similar. I wrote for many years for the LA Times, and of course that had the biggest readership in this area. Now I'm writing for the LA Stage Times, not to be confused with, and it has a much smaller readership, but it's a much more theater-intensive readership. So I am able to say certain things and assume that most of my readers will know what I'm talking about without explaining it in such detail as I used to at the LA Times.
Great. Stephen, I just want to double click on something you said. So the distinction between the Billy Elliot reader and the Sacred Fools or Antaeus reader, how does knowing that difference exist in the readership change how you approach it?
I think with Billy Elliot, there's a lot of information that's already out there about it. So there's a lot less, as you put it, explaining that has to be done. There's a lot, I can go with a lot more presumptions about the history of it. It's been, the people who are interested in reading about this particular revival, this touring production, I should say, sure. Will have a body of knowledge about it. Often with the smaller theaters, we're doing new work, and there comes with that a really thrilling kind of responsibility that to help as well as guide and educate people who might not know what on earth they're trying to do, and just sort of run like the front line of a guard, through and clear a passage for their work to be understood.
Can I ask, do you usually see an original production of like a Billy Elliot to have a kind of a frame of reference, or?
It's 50% of the time. It just depends on how, my job is here, so.
But if it's been on Broadway,
But if it's been on Broadway, I'm in New York two or three times a year, perhaps. So I might have caught it. I did not see the Broadway production.
So that must change your review, your criticism, as far as if you've seen the original, as far as how you.
Absolutely, yeah.
I live here and don't have the money to go back to New York very often. So for the most part, if I'm going to be doing something like that, I have to count on the very first tour to be, if it's something that's at large. And that's going to be sort of my bellwether for things beyond that, and how people change when they're not trying to at least recreate the original becomes something that I can evaluate for creativity and things of that sort. But by and large, I see it first in LA. I mean, there's been a few, but most of them I see locally. So I have to operate from that thing. But I try to, if it's something that has been on the national stage, whether it's Cherry Jones' version of The Heiress or something of that sort that's made a big splash there, I will try very hard to see that here, because that gives me a context for everything else.
Sure. So looking at criticism as its own literary form or act of creative expression, can we talk a little bit about when each of you thinks it's successful? What makes a successful piece of criticism?
As opposed to a successful review?
As opposed to a successful review or unsuccessful. When does criticism do its job?
I think when it makes a reader's or potential audience, or an audience who's come in after they've seen the show, rethink their presumptions about what they have seen or what they're going to see. It's provocative. It changes people's minds. It changes it changes worldviews.
I mean, sometimes that happens when I read a piece of criticism and I suddenly realize that I had not thought of that myself in somebody else's writing. And I enjoy that experience.
I think what works for me and what helps me is because I come from the inside out. Even when I'm seeing a show, I go to see a show and I put my hands in, or put myself in the hands of the actor, the director, the set designer, to be taken on a trip. And so when I read something that tells me, that shows me sort of the inside and outside of the story, of the review. If it's, whether I agree with it or not, I like being able to see in a critique that they got it or that they didn't get it, you know. So
I actually got a phone call one time from a woman who was an actress, fairly in a very small part in a production that was being done at the Taper, and there were references in the play to Dali and things like that, and I put them into my review, trying to explain that this is the dream sequence is very Dali-esque and that sort of thing. And she called me up and said, "Oh, thank God somebody got it." Yeah. And I thought, okay, well, good. That's part of, you know, that I sometimes feel that it's been successful when I realize that I am giving people an entrance into something they might not otherwise have understood or have felt a connection to. Because if something really emotionally moves me, I try to bring that to the table as well, so that other people will maybe have an emotional entrance.
Of course, if we do not feel that we got it, I don't think we should lie about it.
Oh, no, yeah, absolutely not. There's something very strange going on up there.
There's something of a continuum, though. I mean, when you see a good piece of writing and it engages you and you're like, oh, I want to go see that show. Sometimes it's, you know, is it something so exciting that you would cross the street to go see, or would you cross town to go see it, or would you take an airplane and go across the country to see it? And then you actually see it and then you're like, oh, that was nothing like I expected from the writer. And then you actually learn something about the critic, about what their aesthetic is and whether it matches or not. And I think that that's kind of a crucial piece, but it's very time consuming too, to see the criticism and then have to go and actually see the production and see how well it matches. And then over time, you know, do they match up more with each review or criticism and each production, or, you know, so it's labor intensive, it seems.
I suppose, but, you know, I guess I've been writing for the same audience for a really long time, and that has been a benefit to me, because I figure if I can be consistent, then the people that who are going to be reading my reviews for the most part can gauge whether or not they will respond the way I respond, because they've there's been enough give and take over time. At least I hope so. It seems to work. It's consistency. I mean, I wrote something recently where I was saying basically, this is very nitpicky, but if badly hemmed costumes really bother me, then they need to bother me all the time. I had my mother, bless her heart, who is no longer able to be a theater critic, had a big thing about anybody who pulled out, small theaters where they'd pull out a quill pen, but it was one of those big ostrich feathers, and she'd just get apoplectic. But she did it for every production that did that. I mean, it's consistency so that people can begin to understand your relationship to theater and therefore can gauge how their relationship to theater matches with yours or doesn't. There was a movie critic for one of the local TV stations years ago who hated a lot of things that I liked, and when I finally read in the Times the story of his life and the things that he had very strong reactions to, it was like, oh, okay. So then you could always gauge, well, he's never going to like that, so he's going to hate it, but it doesn't mean I will. Do you see what I mean? That kind of thing, that was important to me.
Is a bad hem because you were in a small theater?
Pardon?
Is a bad hem because you were in a small theater and you could see it, or?
Well, actually, in this particular case, it wasn't in a small theater. It was awful, and buttons that didn't, it was awful. I'm sorry, my very first job at the age of 16 was in a costume department, and there's certain things that just make me go, oh.
But if the performance was good, you wouldn't have noticed the bad
I'm going to say, oh, this whole thing is terrible because it has badly hemmed costumes. No, but I may, if I don't mention it in the review, which I sometimes don't if I feel I'm being way too obsessive, I may go up and mention it to the theater people and say, really? Really? And with all the stuff you're doing here, you can't even hem a frickin' dress, you know?
Gives me a good segue for a question of whether you think it's important for a critic or a reviewer to have inside knowledge on the production, to have been a part of the theater making process.
Well, that's two different questions, isn't it?
Answer either.
I mean, I don't think we should have inside knowledge on the particular production that we're reviewing, because the people who are reading us don't have that kind of inside
You're asking
knowledge.
if they're theater makers. Have you made theater in the past?
Happy to ask both questions. So let's start with whether the writer has been involved in the process of making theater in their career.
You mean the particular show that they're seeing, or
in their resume? Were they a dramaturg? Were they a costume design assistant, hemmer of costumes?
I think it helps. I think it helps to have had that experience on some level, but I don't think it necessarily needs to have been a professional experience.
Yeah, I don't think you need to have been a professional, but I think to have had a hand at things like directing or creating theater. I mean, I wish I could say, oh yes, I've been an actress, but I'm really bad. But I'm not a bad director. So, although I didn't pursue that, having done it a little bit helps me to understand when what I'm seeing, whether it's going right or going wrong, is a process mostly of if the direction has led it into that, or if the actor's leading into that. I'm making this very simplistic, but you do get a visceral sense for who is creating the artistic influence that is driving whatever is happening that is catching your attention. Let's put it that way, because you had it happen to you a little bit.
I have a story where I studied under Paula Vogel, and she was having a residency at Arena Stage in DC, and she conducted a very interesting, I'd say it's an experiment, in that she had a 6-week playwriting workshop for any DC theater critic who was interested in taking this playwriting workshop, so that they could refresh, what the experience or what the difficulties or how a play even comes about. And I thought that was kind of interesting, just to enhance the critics' maybe take on how to approach the writing of a play in the review. What do you think, Stephen, Dawn? Would you take a writing workshop to write a play and write a scene, just to?
I would take such a workshop in another place where I'm not actually an active critic. I would prefer that, because I don't want there to be conflicts of interest in any way with my own community that I'm reviewing. But I think Stephen probably has a different take on that.
Probably. I don't know. Sometimes when I talk with theater people after a show, if I'm talking with actors, I've never seen critics as vicious as actors are to other actors. I mean, I'm shocked. They talk about critics being mean. It's unbelievable what they say.
But I think that's because we know what it takes we're in the shoes. We know what it takes to show. We know what it takes to provide the story, to get in the shoes of the character. We know the work that it takes. And so if you see another actor or a director that has directed something incorrectly, I don't know if that's even the right word to use, but doesn't honor the natural course of a character or the natural course of the story. You know, I think it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing that we do. I mean, we're made to pretend that we are, say, you know, South African, pregnant, dying of AIDS, living in a little shanty town, you know, having to learn an accent. And I think it's important sometimes to make sure that everything is laid out, so that you don't have to pretend. And I think it's important for a critic to know that. And yes, actors, you know, if we don't believe it, then we have to speak on that.
But I think that's true. But then you talk with directors, as I sometimes do, and just what's going on. And the first people they attack are the other directors, or critique. They don't attack. They don't, it's going too strong. They critique the other. You know, I mean, the wrong choice here. And they're focused completely on the director. And you talk to the playwrights, and they're just merciless with other playwrights. And you start to go, okay, what's going on here? This goes back to your thing about we think we're reviewing the play, but the play is actually reviewing us. Yeah. And I think that was your point, Alice. And so I'm of a mixed feeling. You know, I do work as a playwright, not very much in Los Angeles. I've tried to get outside the city for all the reasons that Don alluded to. But I don't think there's a cut and dried answer to that. I think it depends on one's view of what criticism is, on whether it is, how small it is or how broad the purpose of it is. If it's about the art form and it's an honest discussion about choice decisions that have been made and what the consequences of those decisions are, I think the insight of having worked in some professional capacity or amateur capacity is very helpful. But people who are just gratuitously mean or just picky for the sake of, for reasons of their own psychology, I think that's pernicious somehow. Mm-hmm. So again, it's another it depends answer.
I'm so interested to know how your playwriting affects your criticism and vice versa.
I hate playwrights.
Maybe I
can't stand them. Can't stand them.
Someone tweet that, please.
I love critics.
I love critics.
No, see, I think I've been accused of having too much compassion for what playwrights go through.
You've been accused by who?
By other critics. Oh. Yeah.
Too compassionate towards playwrights.
Yeah. Because I just really understand the travails of that process from having been in those shoes. So.
Does it affect your playwriting?
No. No.
Does it affect your critique? Oh, sorry. Does it affect your critiquing?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I will sometimes go to the mat defending a playwright when I suspect, after reading a play, that something's gone terribly wrong, because I know how easy. I've seen productions of Chekhov, and we know that's a good play, look like As the World Turns or a soap opera. And so that can happen very, very easily, and it can happen in a very slippery way. So I will tend to get a copy of the script and read it and see what the text is first before passing judgment on what happened on that stage if something went wrong.
Thank God for you.
Well, that's really interesting, yeah, because I always figure that my job is to see what it is the person sitting in the theater seat is going to see, and if whatever's happened, you know, you have to try and define which is responsible, playwright, director, actor, whatever, set designer, but that that the specialized knowledge of having had a chance to read things ahead of time that they're not going to get a chance to read, you it's sort of like I always resent all the masses of flotsam that show up in some of the larger theater programs is the let me explain it to you stuff. In that if other people are, if you have to explain it, it should be there. It should be there. I should be able to walk in to the theater and sit down and have the experience an audience member is going to have and process that perhaps with a little extra knowledge about the art form, but be able to process what's there without having to go back and read the script to understand whether or not it is being effective or not. I don't know. It's just a different approach, I guess, but it also may be simply because I couldn't write a line of convincing dialogue to save my life, so I don't have to worry about being a playwright. And poetry, yes. Playwriting, no. And but there's that sense that I want to be able to tell people what they're going to be experiencing. My specialized knowledge, if it is, just comes from a long history of being in the theater and reading a lot of stuff over time. But to have to study the script ahead of time would seem to be just a little too extra special to, I mean, from my perspective, to allow me to speak to what they're going to have to process when they go in there. So,
Stephen, I don't know, did you mean studying it ahead of time necessarily, or did you mean having the script and reading it
having a script and reading it after I've seen the production?
After the fact, yes. I do that frequently, and I think that publicists should make scripts available for any new play, certainly, because I don't like to take notes when I'm watching a play, because I feel that that's going to divert me away from the stage and down to my note-taking. And I like to have the script available to me so that I can check to see if I heard something accurately. But I do not think that you should read them in advance because of the reasons that Frances is mentioning.
As a playwright, I really appreciate that you read the plays, because sometimes a production, and especially, I mean, a new play is like a puzzle. You know, sometimes the first production doesn't quite capture it, even the second or third. I mean, I think that there's a situation right now where readings have become a genre of plays in and of itself. And so a play that reads really well usually is not that interesting in production. And a play that doesn't read well, that is complicated, that you actually have to have kind of visual cues, you have to have a certain sonic landscape, you know, these usually don't get produced. Or if they get produced, the first time is, you know, it's kind of hit or miss. It's like you might get it, you might not get it, or the audience doesn't engage it. It's asking you to engage in a new way. And so I really appreciate that you might be able to read the script after a production that might be a little enigmatic or unclear, and then maybe clarify and hopefully provide one little capillary of blood possibility of it moving forward to be seen and maybe executed in another way. So that's great.
Just the other day, I saw Cloudlands at South Coast, and I thought I heard a line in which the character was saying, "I've met your daughter." And then when I read the script, it said, "I haven't met your daughter." Oh. Now, I guess it's possible the actor misspoke, but it's possible I just didn't hear it. So, and it was a rather crucial plot point, so I'm glad I cleared that up.
Well, and I must admit, I mean, even if you go back historically, I was involved with 2 productions back in the days when I was involved with productions of that old Thornton Wilder play, Skin of Our Teeth, where the director had no idea what the play was talking about. And that was really frustrating. And it wasn't until I saw another production significantly later that actually had someone who understood, as well as some of us actors did, that was in my brief acting period, what the playwright intended, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, to everybody, whereas it had been deeply obscure and bizarre, and the audience is left very disquieted because it was deeply obscure and bizarre, and it really didn't have to be if it was directed properly. So that's true. And I mean, I guess, yeah, it's afterwards I find myself going back, if I have a script available, and looking for specific pieces where I want to be sure I'm right, but I don't find myself studying the play, again, I guess because I'm just married to the whole concept of performance.
So going back to the first question that kind of embedded in that broader question, what's fair game and what's off limits in terms of outside information in your review or your criticism of a show? So you both had said, try not to look at the script beforehand, but after. Are there other pieces? You're both, everyone on the panel is very deeply embedded in the community. What's allowed, what's not allowed?
I think if a feature article has appeared about the show and the general public can read the feature article, I think that I have the right to read that article before I go to the play.
What's not allowed? Sometimes people kind of whisper things in your ear about conflicts that have happened backstage, and I don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it. It's just, I'm on the job.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's not going with the mindset about the company. And specifically, if you've heard some people disparaging the way it's run or artistic choices that have been made in various places, to make sure that you back yourself off from that and don't get involved in what high schoolers refer to as the drama. But because that's not really what you're there to be involved with. You're there to be involved with whatever gets produced out front. And I tend to not want to know what I'm going in to see. I love, it's a personal thing. I just love the process of being surprised. And if I have to do things afterwards, I'd much rather go in and have a delightful surprise and then begin to process it through and write it up than go in with expectations that may not be what I see. Now, obviously, if you're seeing Shakespeare, or you're seeing Molière or something, you have certain expectations. But even then, I found myself delightfully surprised sometimes, where I wouldn't have if I'd been reading an article about the director talking about exactly what they're trying to do with it and how they're going to change it around. I want to see it first.
Have you ever had an experience where you had no idea what the play was about?
Close one time.
Did you go back and see it?
Actually, what I find is that that's one of those ones where I stare at the ceiling all night. And I end up staring at the ceiling all night afterwards, thinking, okay, all right, oh, well, okay, and so you sort of process over time. I think that, so I guess the answer is actually, in the long term, no. I've never had one where I was completely nonplussed. There's been once where I thought it went away going, okay, and had to stop and think about it for a while, but no. Maybe I just haven't hit one of those, or maybe it's my little provincialness because I'm over in this end of Los Angeles mostly, but no.
You keep giving me these looks, Stephen. It was like, did I ask?
Just trying to think. No, about your question, it was good.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question.
No, sometimes I'm perplexed and find it, certain plays are impenetrable productions, and then you just start asking, okay, what do they want? What were they trying to get at? What were the images? And you just start asking and probing and asking and probing. Which is
like a playwright.
Like a
playwright.
Yeah. Trying to figure out, you said it's a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing, I think.
I mean, honestly, it's just, it sounds so silly, but I had a really good high school English teacher, and she always was giving us probing questions to ask. And I found that through my entire life, when I go to see something I don't completely understand, I start going through that list of questions, and it really helps.
What kind of questions are they?
Well, a lot of them have to do with symbolism, and what could that mean? Why would somebody be doing that? It's not natural. What would be the purpose? And so you just, you begin fleshing things out from that.
I want to say that one of the outside influences which I really cannot abide is when other critics come up to me at intermission and start talking about the play. And I'm surprised by how many critics out there do this.
Well,
period, end of statement.
Or it's also a little awkward. The worst is when you've just seen something, particularly something that's like kind of meh, and people rush up to you afterwards who are involved with the production. What did you think? Oh, it's awful.
No
awful.
Professional would do that, right?
Well, no, not ever.
Certainly no one in this room.
Of course not. But yeah, that's very, very difficult.
You can always say, I don't know yet. It's it's intermission.
Oh, absolutely. Or I just say, you'll read about it. I don't talk about those things. But it's very awkward moments sometimes when people involved with production or people who know people who are involved with production try to pump you for information so they'll be the first one to know.
Well, I think they are actually trying to make you commit to something favorable
Absolutely.
in advance.
Yes.
Before you've seen all the evidence.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Here's a question for the artist on the panel. Actually, everyone on the panel is an artist. For the actress and the playwright.
Playwrights.
Playwrights, sure. We'll have Stephen wear his playwright hat for this question. How does criticism inform your process? Either pre, during a run, or after a production?
Do you read them, Deidrie?
Can you hold the microphone up? Yeah.
Sometimes I read reviews. I generally, it's like the amount of time that I've taken to study a character and to get in the shoes of the character and to, I know that it's my responsibility to, when an audience comes in, I put them in my hand, and it's my responsibility to take them from point A to point B and have them believe the entire thing. And so I generally don't care what a reviewer has to say about my performance or the production, probably until after. I can't, because it's my job to invest in what I've invested and invest in the research and the study and the director and to do what the director has, has asked and to guide the story. And so if I start taking in people's opinions about how it should be or how it should not be, then I think that starts to bite into the integrity of what I've created. If it's a good review, and if I've heard people come and say, oh, they gave you a good review, which thankfully is usually the case. However, I was in a play, this was a play that I did several years ago, and this was in Portland, and where the reviewer said, basically the name of this play was Excrement, period. That was the review. And I thought it was a great play. I mean, they didn't necessarily say anything about the actors, but basically them saying that the play was excrement. I read that in the beginning and I just laughed because I thought, well, the house is full every night and people are loving it. So I think from that moment I realized that it's an opinion. It's an educated opinion in many ways, but it's still an opinion, and I have to hold on to what I've created.
I always find I learned so much about the critic from the review. And this is after, having written plays for almost 20 years now, you get a little bit more philosophical. In the beginning, when you first enter into the playwright realm, it's kind of more about feeding ego, and you want to see yourself exist kind of in public, and so you can take it pretty, they always say if you believe the good ones, you have to believe the bad ones too. But then it's always kind of, because I'm a little bit of an accidental playwright. I didn't mean to be a playwright. I just kind of fell into it. And so it's like, it's always amazing. It's like people show up and they actually write about it, And then because most of my plays take place in Los Angeles or have a very Los Angeles lens, because I am from Los Angeles, the San Fernando Valley. What's that?
Kudos to you.
What, being from the Valley?
Well, that, yes.
And being...
writing about it, yeah.
Oh, I'm not writing about the Valley. I'm writing about the concept of Los Angeles.
Well, that's great.
As far as it being like a naturally postmodern city where there's no center, except for suburbs with a mall that kind of is, the organizing principle. And then like disparate elements juxtaposing up against each other. That's kind of postmodern, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Sounds good.
So
I want to be in it.
So then I have these Los Angeles plays that play in New York or in Amherst, and so it's interestingly a way to have a new kind of relationship with a city, like what their aesthetic is, what they think of the play. Sometimes they don't even think of it as a Los Angeles play, but I kind of like to frame it that way. I mean, I think the cue for our moment in time is context and framing. It's like, if you can't answer a question, then at least frame the question so you can start approaching the answer, right? So, and I did admit that I love critics. I didn't know that I did until this moment, Stephen. But I do appreciate that they are giving me cues and clues to this big puzzle. I keep talking about it as a puzzle. And, you know, sometimes like I did this piece in the Actors Theater of Louisville that they commissioned with New Paradise Laboratories from Philadelphia, and it was about bachelor parties. It was an American bachelorette party spectacle. And it's New Paradise Laboratories is very kind of, they're very pop, but they're very metaphysical at the same time. So it's all kind of physical dramaturgy. It's not a straight up play. And then I had to put text to it and such. And I just remember when it was in the Humana Festival, Isherwood did not even mention it. You know, it's like all the plays are mentioned, everything, and then there was like one little bracket, you know, by the way, there was this something. You know, which I thought was so interesting. It's like, really? Oh, didn't even care to like enter at all, engage, nothing. Whereas I think Charles McNulty had a very, like, even though he didn't care for it, he said something like, oh, doesn't have the heart of Chaikin, it's not as intellectual as the Wooster Group, it's not as precise as City Company. And that just cued to me, oh, he's putting it into this genre of course, ensemble devised theater work, but I actually thought that it was something completely different. So, I mean, that's what I mean, you learn so much about who the writer is and what their aesthetic is, of course. I mean, that's what critics do. They offer their lens. And so I always welcome them no matter what they're saying. I mean, in the beginning, it was harder to do so. I've had one production in Los Angeles, and it was, you know, it was a kind of an experiment about the Asian glob. Like I get assigned this label of Asian American, even though I'm from Chinese descent. But because in the United States, everything kind of looks the same. You know, Chinese, Japanese, Thai, Hmong, Cambodian, Filipino, we're all just Asian American, right? So when I was in grad school, I wrote a play where I kind of became really fascinated by ikebana flower arrangements, which are Japanese flower arrangements. And it's like the position of the flower, the relationship of the flower with the wood and the moss, and then the color. You know, there was all this like hidden meaning. So I decided to write a play with 15 scenes, each one based on one of the ikebana arrangements, but have a Chinese story, a 3-generation Chinese matriarchal story, you know, just to like contend with the glob, the Asian glob. And so nobody got it. And so, I mean, that led me to kind of think, oh, the real definition of Asian America is that the Asians don't quite get it and the Americans don't quite get it. You know, and so maybe somewhere in the middle, some kind of hybrid, because when it was even playing in my grad school, we presented it, you know, some Taiwan scholars were at the school, and someone said, oh, there's this play called Ikebana that's playing, would you like to come see it? You're Asian, don't you want to see an Asian play? And it's like, Ikebana, that's Japanese. I'm Chinese. Why would I want to see a Japanese play? So you can't win.
I had a play produced off-Broadway a couple of years ago. I just, in terms of relationship to critics and what that happened, the only thing I remember was that the play was a noir drama set in Los Angeles. And the New York Times really loved the first act and felt that the second act kind of was too obvious and drove home the points too obviously. But it was very respectful. I was still grateful to get out of there without being completely skewered. And then backstage, meanwhile, said the first act was just a total waste of time and the whole thing fell together with clarity in the second act. So what's a playwright supposed to do with that? I mean, with that kind of information, I don't know. Perhaps the most telling thing, in terms of where you find your criticism, I was going home after a performance, I was on the subway, and sitting across from me, there's 2 people, complete strangers, an older couple, and they're on some discount program. They had the programs, they had come from the theater, and they had the programs to my play. And they were sitting there kind of thumbing through, and I thought, here's my chance. And I sidled on up to them and said, so, what did you think? About what? They said, the play. You saw a play? Oh, it was great. It was wonderful. It was a complete fantasy of what a playwright was. And they say, why do you ask? I said, I wrote it. And then they said, we have a couple of notes.
Did you incorporate those notes in second production?
I got onto another car.
They like the first act, or did they like the second act?
I don't remember, actually.
Too
Awesome.
traumatized.
But I think that speaks to the fact that it's an opinion, and everybody comes to the story with their own history and their own ideas and their own concept of what they want to see and how they want to see the story turn out.
Yes.
You know, and so
Yes.
I think as the playwright and as the actor, you can't please everybody, you know.
Along those lines, I had a play that was kind of pornographic, and
Kinda?
it was porno.
Okay.
It was literary smut. I mean, the whole question of the play, I guess when I write plays, I'm always trying to test something. I was like, can porno actors actually act, or will actors perform sex on stage? That was the question. But I noticed that when
Seeking a production in Los Angeles.
it's actually going to be in Toronto this summer, woo! And so when it was more of a heterosexual audience, it was a drama, tragedy. And when it was a gay audience, it was a comedy. To your point, Deidrie.
I'm sure that was set in the San Fernando Valley, right?
I do come from Chatsworth.
We have a question from Twitter.
Oh, really?
We do, for real. Yeah, green card. This is for the critics. How difficult is it for you to put on the appropriate hat of the target audience who's buying tickets to the show when you review a show?
Well, I have a really broad, different kinds of theaters that I go to. Well, I'm not saying this well. There's a very broad spectrum of theaters that I cover. Everything from extremely cutting edge to community theater. And I try very hard to temper my phrasing when I'm dealing with community groups which have amateurs or semi-pro people involved, because they're doing it more for the love of it than anything else, and they're not doing it expecting to be professional, and neither is the audience going to see it expecting to see totally professional productions. Although I will say some of the community theaters in this area have gotten better and better, but it's, at least the ones that have survived, a lot of them have died. But, so I try to understand that the people who are even going to set foot in there are looking for things different than people who are going to see brand new plays at a really, at a more cutting edge kind of place, say Theater at Boston Court or something like that, where they're going to be challenged a good deal more. And that's a different audience from the people who will go to the Pasadena Playhouse, for example. The Pasadena Playhouse audience is a really interesting mix of people. I remember when they were in the process of restoring the theater, some guy who was working in the little stage upstairs that's now called the Carrie Hamilton said, you know, in Pasadena, the Pasadena Playhouse is like a religion or something. And so you get the combination of people who are there because they're very theater-centered and they're involved with various forms of the entertainment business, and this group of religious devotees who go there because it's the Playhouse. And so if you appeal to one, you don't appeal to the other. That's the really difficult part in dealing with the Playhouse, in that if I talk to a traditionally theater-going audience about what I'm seeing there, I will have people, I've had this happen more than once, I'll go to some kind of community gathering and be accosted by people who said, I don't know why you like that play, I thought that play was terrible, or vice versa, because they have a completely different lens than the other people that I was talking to. And so it's, and because I am a part of the community, it becomes, they make sure that I know. And so it's really hard to try to put on exactly the right hat for the group of people that you're writing for. What I try to keep in mind is the group of people who read the newspapers. And that's becoming harder because now that I'm in the blog, there's people reading me who are not that standard audience I've always had. So I'm not sure now, but always it was, okay, who do I see sitting around me in this theater? That's who I'm writing for.
must be a generational divide between newspaper readers and blog readers,
Yes,
isn't there?
yes,
So
quite a
how
lot.
do you relegate that?
I'll get back to you in about a year. I've only been in the blog for a year, and it is very different. The other thing I'm finding out about the blogging, which is the less attractive side of it, is, I mean, I'm sure all of you at one point or another who write about theater has gotten some hate mail here and there at one time or another. But the stuff that I occasionally get, and it's now that we're in the on the internet, is far more immediate, far more anonymous, and far more nasty. And that is also something that I'm sort of learning to cope with, and particularly, interestingly enough, when it's community groups. They get vicious, really vicious. So.
I think there's, thinking this through, I think there's two sides. One is that if you know an audience is paying $100 for a ticket, that carries a certain responsibility that you have to take seriously. That's a huge investment of time and money, and you're, on some level, trying to suss out whether this is a worthy investment. The other side of that equation is that you can't really second guess. People are people. There's a target group or whatever, but an audience the members of an audience are individuals, and they have various reactions, and I think it's fundamental comes down to how do you react to it, and just to be honest with an understanding of the context, that this is maybe it's a commercial production that's a high-ticket venue, or an experimental production, and which has a different set of standards attached. I mean, not standards, but a different set of reviewing criteria. So
we're not there to take a survey of the audience. That's not why the critics are there. That's what surveys are for.
Fill out your surveys at the end of the day.
We're there basically to say what we thought, and I mean, you do have to take the audience into consideration occasionally, but I don't think that should be your primary factor, and especially if you're there on opening night, you've got to understand that half the audience are friends of the production, and they're going to give it a wildly enthusiastic reaction no matter what it is.
I think that's very true. One of the most deceptive things, particularly in a larger house, is to go on an opening night. You will get reactions that can have very little honesty. I think the worst of the ones I ever saw was a production at the long-dead Huntington Hartford Theater, where I actually watched somebody in the flies give a signal to a celebrity who was not with us anymore to start a standing ovation. And it was not standing ovation worthy, even by LA standards. And
Leigh stand and ovates at everything, it seems.
yeah, it's like I was some critic for the Times. I remember one time writing about how ridiculous it was to walk out of the theater and have somebody say, "Well, it didn't even get a standing ovation." But it was really weird to see that happen, and and they were touting it as going to Broadway, and it didn't, and it shouldn't. And but if you had been in that opening night audience with all these people screaming and yelling and stomping on the floor, you would have thought, "Oh my God! I mean, this must be fabulous. Maybe I'm just not getting it. But this must be wonderful." And it really wasn't. So I think that there are many times when an opening audience can be a really big pain. There's one time when an opening night audience, however, was wonderful, and that was the opening night of True, Robert Morse doing Truman Capote. And the first thing that happens is you hear him speak before he comes on stage. And a lot of the people who were sitting around me in the audience had known Capote. And when the first lines came out over the sound system, there was an audible gasp. And I thought, wow, that means he's really got it. And that was kind of neat, because it was this, oh my gosh, that sounds just like him. And so that was kind of fun. But ordinarily, opening night audiences are more to be ignored at professional companies than listened to in order to create your reaction, because they are very artificial.
I actually don't like it when critics come to opening night. I just think because of that. I mean, opening night, you're going to get the standing O. You're going to have so much more energy out there. And I like when they come, give it a couple days. let it breathe before you come and, you know, and critique it.
I don't know if the publicists would agree with you on that.
Probably not. You're probably right. You're probably right.
Wish you got reviewed towards the end of the production when everything actually settles in.
Yeah.
Well,
That's the sweet, you know, that's when it's sweet.
I mean, I can't possibly go to every show on the opening weekend, so I see a lot of shows later in the runs, and sometimes I write about them.
And sometimes you don't.
How do you decide whether you're going to write about them or not?
I mean, that's a long story. I like to write a column in which I make connections between various productions, and so sometimes if I see a show but it just doesn't fit into that theme, it's very difficult for me to sort of push it into the commentary.
Since the topic of hate mail came up, I'd love to hear from the critics about any dialogue or sort of exchange that you have with the artist after you've written something, be it positive or negative. Certainly in the online forum, it's very easy to comment now. But anytime in your careers when there's been something that you might want to point at about that exchange of a conversation after a review's come out, where they've wanted to engage you directly.
Actors do that?
Yeah, I say that really is very rare.
Yeah.
To have
I can't imagine an
artists.
actor contacting a critic.
I mean, a producer might, more likely than an actor. I once got some middle-of-the-night phone calls from a producer who told me that he would have me fired, but he didn't even know the correct name of my boss.
So he knew your phone number.
I have no idea.
I had a letter delivered to the managing editor of the paper at the time from a woman who claimed that I had ruined her life and that if she ever committed suicide, it would be my fault.
The drama.
Yeah. But other than that, and that one phone call from the woman who said, "Thank God you got it," you know, most of the time the artists and artists don't contact. I did have a situation where a director I do like a great deal invited me to come without writing something to go see a show that she had done because she just wanted me to give her some feedback, which was fun. I mean, that was really neat. It was way out of my distribution area, so there was no way I was going to do it otherwise.
But these community groups that you were talking about that are sending you.
Well, yeah, I mean, you get the occasional, particularly. There have been a few times where, when the director comes and leans over your shoulder in the middle of the second act and says, "So, how do you like it?" You know, that have been a little crazy. But as far as after the fact, it isn't usually the artists who write the nasty letters. It's patrons. Yeah, there was the guy who I think his last name was Reed. The guy who played the father on the Brady Bunch hated me, and he would call up my editor after every review I gave for one musical theater company that isn't around anymore and scream and yell about how I hadn't been harsh enough. After every single one. It's terrible, the man died, but it was kind of like, oh, thank God. You know? Because really, it was like she coming, well, you got another, you know, and she'd have to quote it to me. And there was a time that I wrote exactly how ridiculous it is to do Desert Song now, because it's old, but not just old, it's old. I mean, my father raised me on The Student Prince, which was his favorite musical, God bless him. But the Desert Song is awful. I mean, anything that begins with a bunch of Arab Muslims singing a drinking song has got some really big problems. It's one of those things where the comic relief in the show is just, you know, superfluous. It's ridiculous. So I said so, you know, because quite aside from other things, you just have to say occasionally, really? Why are we doing this anymore? And they devoted an entire page of letters to the editor in the Star News to people screaming at me. Don't you realize that was my first date when I'm 1928? And, you know, I mean, it was just huge. People just absolutely appalled that I could hate the show, and especially since one of the stars had been on Lawrence Welk.
Cue
but,
bubble machine.
yes. So I mean, but it's usually from patrons. It's not from, at least I assume so. The ones I'm getting online now, and they're I've had some really nasty ones recently, are all anonymous. So it's hard to tell.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think the environment is getting, which is probably reflective of something larger out there. There seems a free-floating anger now that didn't seem to exist before. Or maybe it's because of the social media and the availability of the anonymous comments that makes people become much more vitriolic than they used to be. And they are usually patrons. What I have noticed is that I do actually believe sometimes theaters get campaigns going where the hostile comments come in because they all start to kind of sound the same. And I'm wondering if they've been orchestrated and what looks like a medium for free speech is actually being taken over and co-opted into something quite different. But I have no evidence for that. But then what follows are the private emails, and the people who tend to have a sympathy with what I've written contacted me privately or through Facebook, but not on the paper's comment section, which is really interesting. And they often, maybe they've read them and they feel they need to respond, but they don't want to get involved in that fray because it's just so ugly and tawdry and kind of sordid. It's yeah. So that's my insight on that.
This for the three writers who've been engaged in communities for quite a while and established a significant body of work. We've been talking a lot about sort of specific individual reviews and engaging in critique of those productions or if it's new work. Can you talk a little bit kind of broader context about how your work is a dialogue with the community over time? Sort of the process of a year's worth of shows. Certainly, Dawn, I'd love to hear your take and your approach with LA Stage Times, sort of the idea of sort of combining two shows. But if you could each kind of take a stab at that idea, this sort of broader dialogue with the community.
I think there are actually more individual reviews of shows being written now than there used to be because of the internet. And maybe they're not that accessible, but thanks to Bitter Lemons, we can access them rather easily, most of them. And so I feel that I would rather not do that and that I would rather write about larger issues that affect the entire theatrical community. And when I write about shows, as I said, I like to draw these connections between them. Because I do think that the Los Angeles metropolitan area is so vast and so spread out that if it's ever going to get any respect, it really has to have somebody actively making these connections in what's going on throughout the entire theatrical community here. I think far too many of our theater practitioners don't go out and see other people's shows, and they just sort of live in isolation from the community and from the context of what's happening. And so I think that's one of my roles that I'm trying to play, and Stephen plays this too often in his column, of trying to look at the bigger picture. Is that what you had in mind?
I think one of the perks of being around for so long is you watch the evolution of companies and you watch them shift and change, and sometimes they have a stated mission and you can kind of just say when they're slipping a little bit, and they tend to take that really seriously only because from the people who have been watching for so long, because and that's a privileged position to be in, and likewise to encourage companies that do show promise to fulfill that promise. So I think it's a terribly important part of a critic's role is to, if we're not having some exchange with the community, I just don't quite know what the point is.
I think that's, yeah, I pretty much what you said, that idea of watching companies grow, change, be nurtured or not nurtured by their surrounding physical communities, and staying as close to their mission, keeping them from slipping, all that stuff is pretty basic to the kinds of things we get a chance to do. I think that it is also, in another way, it's a dialogue with the larger community in which the theater community sits. And a lot of what I've seen as my purpose in this is to try to connect the two so that we don't have, I mean, every once in a while, it seems like every few years somebody despairs of the next generation going to the theater or being involved with theater on the same level. And a lot of what I hope that I do is to find ways to both give feedback to the community itself, with the theatrical community, but also engage the larger community in the theatrical community's need to be there and importance to our society, importance to our self-examination as a society, so that they are intrigued enough to decide to leave their television set and go and explore this genre, which I find so magical because there's so many things you can do in the theater. I mean, this is obvious to all you guys, but so many things you can do in the theater you can't do in any other artistic mode. And to get them out there to feel that and hopefully engage them to return.
I'm wondering, because we are considered a film town, and I always hear, and you can back me up on this, Deidre, if it's true, a lot of people think that doing theater is kind of like making work while you're waiting to get that TV show or to get cast. And I'm just wondering, over time, like this mode, because I actually think that Los Angeles, now that we're in the 21st century, is going to ascend as a cultural center because it doesn't have this kind of pressure of making theater. You know what I mean? It's like it actually can make, I think there are a lot of groups that can be more experimental, can grab a storefront in a strip mall, you know, have this venue. It's like there's low pressure because the stakes here are more about Hollywood. And so I'm just wondering, is it still the same? Is that like, because sometimes I think that, you know, Don, you were saying that people don't go and practitioners don't go and see other people's work. It's because it's like, I'm just doing this so that I can get seen, you know, by a casting agent or something. Do you feel like the field is changing? Like, you know, back to that question of, is LA a theater town? You know, it's like.
Oh, dear God.
But you know what I mean? It's like, I saw a great show, I'm going to call everybody I know to go see it. You know, that to me is like a theater town. Or I'm going to go see all the work, just, you know, even of people I don't know, so it can feed my own work. Do you guys feel like it's changing? That theater is becoming more vibrant and not just an ugly second cousin to film?
I don't think it was ever a second cousin to film. I think it's always been its own entity, and it lurks in some subterranean area, with a possible exception of the very few institutional theaters. It's mostly in those storefronts, and the people who do it, and there's a kind of half-truth to it. They are doing it between television jobs, but I think there's a presumption that therefore it isn't taken as seriously as it is in other cities, and I'm not sure that's true.
I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's, you know, it might be true for some, but you know, theater is hard work.
Yeah.
You know, and you're putting your sweat and your blood and your tears and your energy and everything you have into doing the show, you know, 5 times a week, sometimes 7 times a week, sometimes 8, sometimes 3. But I think there's a love for the craft. I think most of the people that you'll find, the actors that you'll find, love the craft and love the opportunity to get into the shoes of a character and play.
But if you get an under 5, you're not going to rehearsal. You're going to go do the,
well, yeah, because you got to eat.
The one day.
You know, I mean, most of the theaters in town, most of them, there's, you know, it's a 99-seat house, and you're getting paid $25, $30, $40, $50 a week. You can't, you know, that might be enough to put gas in your car, possibly, not to fill up the tank, you know. But so you can't, so, you know, we're not doing it for the money. And of course, if we get a gig, we got to pay the rent.
But off-Broadway in the 70s, I mean, didn't pay anything, and that was the beginning of the contemporary New York theater movement before real estate prices kind of drove it into something else. Right. The action was in the Village, and before it moved north because of the various commercial pressures and the real estate prices in New York. So I think the key to the future of what you're talking about is what's going to happen to real estate prices and the gentrification of the various areas where theaters can now flourish, and if they can afford to continue to do their work in the manner to which they've become accustomed to, which is sometimes, on a shoestring. But, I'm concerned with when they're talking about the changes in Hollywood, for instance, where they're trying to bring in businesses, drive up the prices of all the real estate, and that's going to, have a real effect on the numbers of theater in that district, and they'll probably scatter out to Canoga Park. And
I'm all for mall theater, man.
So,
I think there should be a live theater in every mall to cultivate that audience.
That's right, man.
Before in the original large mall here in the city of Pasadena, there actually was the Pasadena Shakespeare Company moved in and was doing their productions in the mall, it was a hoot. I mean, to walk into the middle of this mall and all of a sudden there's Shakespeare. I mean, it would be great to do.
I've got.
Yeah. Okay. True.
That's right.
For those who didn't hear, the Colony Theater located at a mall.
Yeah.
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 I've got to make my usual case at this point, which
Thank you, Don.
Hammered home, but which never really seems to sink in very well, that we do have more equity contract theater in this city than most people imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
And just a few weeks ago, I called Equity and I asked for the number of productions that were on the 99-seat plan last year, 371. Versus the number of productions that were on some kind of an equity contract. And for that purpose, I extended the definition to include Orange and Ventura counties, because in those counties, you have to work on a contract if you're an equity actor. And there were, let me see, I have it here, 216 productions on contract. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a little bit of a canard to say that everybody here works for peanuts, because there are equity contract productions going on in this city, and I think that we have to try to make more of them if the theater here is to achieve a certain level of respect and professionalism, and if LA is ever to be known as a theater town as well as a film town.
But that's such good information. That's exactly what I was hungering for, to know that that is happening and that it's moving forward. Because I feel like now in the world, more cities are like Los Angeles than like New York. There's not so much grid. I mean, I've been spending time in Shanghai, and it's like the sprawl, the amount that people drive from their suburban home into the city is amazing. I mean, it's like 2-hour traffic jams because there's so many people who want their private cars and stuff. But along those lines, it was about the mall. Oh yeah, because there's so many. We all know great restaurants that are in strip malls. There's this weird kind of if it's in a mall, it's not as serious. And I think that's the thing that LA citizenry needs to look at. It's like, we can't go according to these 20th century definitions of what a city is. This is how our city is. That's how it's organized, and there's really quality stuff happening in strip malls. Great stuff.
Yeah, I still think that the biggest thing that the theater struggles with here in California, I mean, one of the purposes for theater criticism, if we can manage to get people to read it, is that it is. We were interviewing Donna McKechnie when she was out here at one point, and she said the biggest problem with doing theater in Los Angeles is that everybody has a backyard with a barbecue. You have to convince people. I mean, they're not looking for something to do at night. They can sit in the back and eat barbecue. And so convincing people to actually get out of their houses to find theaters that are in places that don't mean the commute, to get them into a space where they will actually go to the theater is the hardest part. If you get them in many cases, they're like, whoa, that was really good. But you have to get them out of their backyard.
I don't know if that's true, though. I don't have a backyard with a barbecue. I mean, how many people here have a backyard with a barbecue?
Yeah.
About 12 hands.
But to speak to what you had just said, though, about there being the equity houses, they're equity houses, but it's equity waivers. So as an equity actor, I can act in these houses that are, 99 seats or smaller, but I'm not getting.
No, I was talking about the ones that use equity contracts as opposed to the 99-seat plan.
Did that include the ones with equity guest artist contracts?
I think so. They were it was very difficult to get them to actually break down the information.
Because unfortunately, that ones, you have a few people getting paid well and everybody else not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question from Twitter, going back to the national profile piece and prestige of the community. I'm not sure the affiliations of the critics, so you'll weigh in on this. The question is, a question from Twitter, not me. How can we invigorate the LADCC so that it's more a significant national profile, bringing LA theater more attention? Perhaps we should ask if any of the 3 critics are members of the LA Drama Critics Circle.
I'm a member of it.
Great.
I'm a former member.
I was asked to be a member at a time when my life was too crazy.
Great.
And nobody's asked since, so there we go.
Well, it's my question. I tweeted it, and I just think that, the New York Drama Critics Circle brings a lot of attention to play. Hang on.
Hello.
There's a
Microphone en route. But we're recording, so yeah.
I mean, it brings a lot of attention to plays, productions, actors, and it just seems like this is an opportunity we're missing from the critics, because some people choose, I don't even know how it works, how some people choose to be on it, some don't. I mean, it seems like it's not the force it should be.
If you're still on it, I suppose you should.
Well, I'm a little reluctant to speak about what they're doing. I know they are in a process. All I know is that they're in a process of reinvigoration, and they seem to be working on doing exactly that, on working around the clock to, serve the community. I think that seems to be their purpose. In ways of, and that's mostly through the awards and through the recognition, and I think they have just revamped things that were so antiquated for so long, like a website, which seems kind of remedial, but at this point they have been doing that. So I think they are aware that there's been a problem and that they're addressing it. That's about as much as I can say, because I'm actually not deeply involved in it.
When I was in the LADCC, it was just about the only awards game in town, as I recall. Certainly the only one that covered all the various levels of theater. And I felt that it was a little more important then than it is now, when the theater community has its own Ovation Awards. I just don't feel that there should be that many awards coming from the critics who get to say what they think all the time in their online or in print. So I just don't feel the need for me to belong to the LADCC like I did 20 years ago. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should feel guilty about that.
Are you talking about championing a play that?
Hold, please.
Wait, hold on. Here you go.
It seems like only half the important LA theater critics are in the circle, and it seems like if everyone was in the circle, you guys and girls could really bring a lot of more attention to homegrown LA theater. If we're trying to do the same thing with the Ovation Awards, how can we elevate these so that I'm on the rules committee, as is Bill sitting here. But how can they get more attention? How can we make them really respected and prestigious in our community, so that everybody goes, oh yeah, that play should have won, not, why did that play win? So anyway, I think that's one thing. The question is, how does it serve Los Angeles? I think the critics could really serve Los Angeles by, you mentioned the isolationism, Don. I think that's really true, but maybe it's a little bit, the critics could be well served to get more together on this as well.
Well, where is the attention going to come from, though? I mean, the Los Angeles Times doesn't have their own first-string critic in the circle, and never has, as far as I can. Well, no, Dan Sullivan and Sylvie Drake were in the old days. Mm-hmm. But since then, I don't think the LA Times chief critic has ever been in the LADCC. So I'm not sure where the attention's going to come from. If I join, I don't. What is that going to add?
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that the Drama Critics Circle is. I mean, I'm kind of the same opinion with you that it really, you know, there shouldn't be all that many awards, and that there are newer ones that seem to have a different kind of validity from what critics are going to say when they say it all the time anyway. So I don't know. I don't have this. I don't see it rising. I don't think it's ever been the kind of force that it would like to have been. And but I mean, who knows? I can't prognosticate. But it just doesn't seem to be this place where things need to be put forward. I think I'm really been very impressed with the growth of the Ovations Awards at this point, and I think that that's probably that kind of thing that is more industry based rather than those of us. It's sort of the difference between the Golden Globes and the Oscars. You know, one is all about critics, and one is about people within the industry. And no matter what you may think of the Oscars, which one has greater validity? You know, with most of the movie-going public, and I just see that as more of the direction. But I'm speaking totally from the outside because I've never had a chance to be on the inside. So
are you asking also about higher profile? Just, I sometimes wonder, oh, can we have like an LA theater, like YouTube show, like, you know, have someone interview, just like local art. It's like 3 to 5 minute blasts, you know, interviewing the artist, talking about you know, it's like something like that. What I always think, because I grew up during, you know, public access, it's like, oh, we don't have public, we have so much more access by having a YouTube something, you know, give it a sexy name, have one of the critics, you know, have rotating critics just interviewing people, and then you I don't know, whatever you can get.
Perhaps you might enjoy the videos that appear on lastagetimes.com from time to time.
Oh, what is that again, Terence? Tell me.
lastagetimes.com.
Thank you.
On the, sort of going back to the 30,000-foot view of serving the community broadly, are there models, either historical or contemporary, where you all have seen a critic engage in the community and be supportive in the way that we're talking about, that we'd like to see, or the opposite, where you feel that a critic has been damaging to a community?
I have an anecdote from 1932.
Fantastic.
Wow, you've been around.
You look great,
Yeah.
Stephen.
oh, wow, he holds up really well.
I think I look pretty good for my age.
Fantastic.
That it was William Sirovich was the state assemblyman from New York who called for House hearings on a profession that was damaging, and it was actually perpetuating the Great Depression. And he was calling that the theater critics of New York be investigated and come for all their bad reviews they were writing, and for the damage they were doing to job opportunities, to the influence they created. And this was George G. Nathan, Brooks Atkinson, that were kind of flummoxed by this. And I think it was George G. Nathan who wryly suggested that perhaps the hearing should be held in Munich, and this was 1932. So you know what that meant.
Wow.
The idea, and this really, I think, gets back to your question about the role of critics. Even when critics were demonized in that way, the idea that they should be held so responsible and so connected, even in this ludicrous kind of way, to the future, to the state of the country, I think is something that, even though I wasn't anywhere near around there, is really kind of thrilling, as perverse as it seems. That anyone would care that much to drag, not like playwrights or something, but drag theater critics in for questioning. I mean, it's bizarre. And so I think that might have been the golden age of drama criticism.
Have you written a play about that?
No, I just
You
found
guys
it.
should read a
This was
play.
reported in Bloomberg about a couple of months ago. I
That's
just
just
found
wonderful.
it. It was just
So
amazing.
we should ban LA theater, and then we'll get really high profile.
Well, you know, on the other hand, I will say that some of the critiques that were coming around at that time, you know, Benchley and Dorothy Parker briefly, which I enjoy reading just because they're really fun to read, were more interested in being fun to read than in telling you anything important other than how awful theater was. And I think that was very detrimental. I think I'll think of only one time that I've felt that as strongly about Los Angeles, and it didn't have to do with theater, well, version of theater, but he's no longer here, and I'm just not going to deal with names, but there was a music critic in Los Angeles for a long time who seemed to feel that his job was to say everything was terrible. And he could be very wounding, and he seemed to take kind of pride in it. I met him a couple of times, and it didn't get any better. And I was vaguely associated with a couple of productions of the LA Opera where I remember they're running in to see his review the day after the opening and saying, oh, he was only a little bit mean. That means we'll be a hit. And I thought, oh my God. I mean, that's the kind, intentionally just slapping everything down all the time is, I mean, there's like gradations of disdain, was mostly what you got. And I think and that's what came from, certainly from Dorothy Parker when she was doing, briefly, theater criticism, and to some extent from eventually back at that, in the 20s and 30s. Those kind of things, it just make me feel uncomfortable because they're not nurturing anything except the writer. And,
I would like to mention a couple of LA Times critics who I think made a big difference. And one of them I just found out about last fall. His name was George Dobinson. I don't know what kind of a critic he was, but he left an enormous cache of information about LA theater to his widow, who donated it all to the LA Public Library. The LA Public Library has a vast storehouse of information about LA theater and programs and clippings going back into the 19th century. Stephen, you're going to have to become very well acquainted with this. Stephen's writing a book about LA theater history. And I just visited this collection last fall for the first time, and I think we all owe something to George Dobinson, whoever he was, from the Los Angeles Times. And then I've got to say that Dan Sullivan, who was the LA Times theater critic from about 1969 until about 1989, was my mentor. I guess I'm a little bit, I have a prejudice about him and how great he was. He wrote very clear prose, and he wrote it very honest prose, and he wrote frequently the kind of big picture pieces in the Sunday Times that are what I was talking about earlier in this conversation. And after he left the Times in 1989, the editors more or less took over the operations. He was more or less his own editor, and the editors basically put the clamps on his successors. And I can't blame each one of his successors so much as I can blame the editors who sort of seized control. And they didn't want that kind of coverage that Dan was providing for so many years. But I think he was a real godsend for LA theater. This was right during the period, of course, when equity waiver was being instituted in the early 70s, and then when it was being changed in the late 80s and all that. And he covered so much, and so many of his reviews were on the front page of the calendar section, and sometimes they were just 99-seat theaters. That's the kind of thing you hardly ever see nowadays.
Stephen and Alice, you both had mentioned in our phone conversations about some particular instances of criticism working. Stephen, you mentioned the New York Times. If you want to talk about, if you remember what you're prompting you and you're not remembering, the idea of returning back to a show.
Oh, I think Isherwood just went back to see Death of a Salesman, I believe, a month after it opened, speaking of your comment about wanting to see it sink in. And I think he wrote that when he saw it, he found it raw in a way and stilted. A month later, he said they had settled into it, and it really was the show that everyone was raving about. That was one example of a kind of thoughtfulness that I appreciate.
And speaking of Isherwood, I think he made Sarah Ruhl's career. He's been very, very supportive of Sarah Ruhl and Clean House and Dead Man's Cell Phone, all the trilogy. And what's her, oh yeah, the Vibrator play. So he writes, and I think when we were talking, I really like reading John Lahr in The New Yorker because of the ability to very much bring out the essence of what a play is. I feel like he is kind of approaching it in a way that, you know, contextualizes why this play is, and then maybe talks about how it was performed or produced, or, you know. But I think that forefront is what the play is bringing into our kind of intellectual culture. Also, I noticed that Hilton Als has been introducing a lot of new, like Young Jean Leigh, he wrote about extensively, and just, you know, just to have a perspective from, I don't know, did he come from music? Was he doing music criticism in New Yorker? And then cultural, okay, and now I notice he's doing a lot more theater, so he's being able to kind of bring forward kind of the newer generation, maybe kind of non-white writers, and bringing context and legitimacy to them.
Cool. With that, I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. We'll start here. We've got microphones, so I'll call on you. Please wait for the mic. Great, we'll hear next.
Somebody once said that theater criticism had 3 rules. What are they trying to do? How well did they do what they were trying to do? And was it worth doing in the first place? Is that still valid?
I think the first 2 are. The second one gets a little bit snotty. I think that if they're trying to do it, obviously, nobody sets out to go through the labors of theater to do something they think isn't worth doing. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the basis, is you ask what decisions are they making, what are they trying to get at, and then you look at the accrued decisions of the various designers, the director, the staging, acting choices, and how they combine into that endeavor, and what the result was. I kind of lean away from the judgment, did it work or did it not? I don't know how really important that is in the larger picture, but I think to analyze the first 2 is absolutely apropos.
Anybody else? Good. Great, we've got a question here, and then we'll come back to the middle.
I have 2 questions, if you don't mind, okay? First one is about ticket prices in some of these productions, small productions. In the last 5 years or so, a lot of prices jumped to $25, $30 per ticket. You go to see the play, and most of the people that are friends of the cast, there are very few real audience people because they don't want to pay the price. Let's put it that way. Is anything you can do something about it and say, hey, we need people to come here to see the play. Let's cut the prices down. Let's cut it to half whatever we charge. Fill up the class, the auditorium. That's question number 1. Question number 2, you have to look at the reality that the internet put out the bookstores, they put them out of business. And now the theaters are in danger. You have to find a way to attract the new people, the people with the iPhones, the iPads, to come to see plays, reach them somehow. You know, in high schools, in movie houses, in shopping malls, try to attract them to come to see your play. And comes to the prices again. If you charge them $30 a ticket, they might not show up. Charge them $10 a ticket, chances are they will come in. Thank you.
I'll take the first question, maybe. How about that? There are certainly lots of discount ticket options. I would say LAStagetix.com, for example, which is a half-price ticket program of LA Stage Alliance, might be a good source for you to find half-price tickets. And there are many, many other discount options. So
There's almost no theater in town that doesn't have a student discount also.
Absolutely. I just got noticed recently that one of the theaters here in Pasadena is actually offering last-minute high school student rush tickets that are free. So there's definitely an attempt to pull in people, younger people, to be interested in the theater, to not have to pay full price. I don't know of any theater, small theater in this area that doesn't have a student price for tickets in general. I mean, in this area. And certainly last-minute student rush is available all over the place. I think it's expensive to do theater these days. It's expensive to find space. It's expensive to pay the electric bill. It's expensive to get the materials to make your set out of. I have never run into a small theater company operator that is getting rich. Most of them aren't breaking even. And I think that that the reason for ticket prices being what they are is a combination of, if they're doing an established play, there's a certain amount they have to pay for the rights to do it. And if they're doing something brand new, they've got to make everything up from scratch. And that just comes to a lot of money. But there are always discounts available for groups, for students, for people who are older, things like that, that you can sort of negotiate around for a lot of the theater companies, particularly the little ones.
And there are a lot of them that have a pay what you can night, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of them, it's like, okay, you know, throw in $5, $10, you know.
Right.
And to the second question for the critics, how do you contextualize work for the virgin theater goer, right? The sort of younger generation who has access to social media and the things that were stated as threatening the theater community. Do you consider in your writing speaking to those audiences and how the work of theater makers is relevant to their lives?
I think there are a lot of plays out there that are drawing audiences in their 20s and 30s. A lot of them are ranging from comedy clubs. I see Upright Citizens Brigade on Franklin. I've seen lines around the block, like you'll never see even at a movie theater, for people waiting to get into those comedy improv shows. That's often a gateway into the theater. There are plays out there about the internet more and more. I don't think I've seen, I'd say 70% of the plays I've seen over the last 6 months involve some kind of multimedia, a visual element. These are not plays. The new plays are not just talking heads anymore. There's dance and there's choreography involved in music.
And lots of video.
Lots of video. And that is appealing to that generation. Also, you know, from the time I mentioned earlier, 1930, standard evening out, what was, you know, when television itself was a fledgling form, was a 3-act, 3.5-hour event in the theater. You can see the standard theater performance now is about 90 minutes without intermission. That's a response to a shift in the culture at large. So I think the theater, in some ways, is responding to that. You know, the critic's job, I suppose, is to draw attention to that, but the other places that are responsible for that are the schools and the universities and the high schools, in order to, you know.
But at the same time, I don't think that we want the theater to be just like what they can get on their iPhones, or else what's the point?
I think that's the thing, is to get, if you can get kids in the theater in the first place, they discover the things that theater can do that their iPhone can't. The suspension of disbelief and stuff, but I agree with you. All the technological advances, I mean, in projections and video and other kinds of sensory things which create an environment that is both recognizable and new. And of course, if all else fails, you just make a musical about the music of Green Day. So, and then everybody goes. But I mean, but they also had a lot of that visual stuff in there as well, where you had a lot of the television screens and the constant references to many things at the same time. It's the most multitasking set I ever saw in my life, and so you have all of that going on. But I know I have a friend who's she's the house manager at the Amundsen, and she was really excited by several shows they've done there recently, which have had a really broad spectrum of people go. You don't have to think they're all great art, but the point is that it is getting kids, whether it's the one about cheerleading or the one about Green Day, it's getting kids into the theater to discover that theater is worth it, and that in itself is the best kind of preach, you know.
But the Green Day, it wasn't a concert, it wasn't a play. I feel like it's hyper-capitalism theater. Yeah. You know, it's like people love that album. I love that album, and it's like no matter what, they'll go see it. No matter what quality of you know, storytelling. Mostly it's about the storytelling. I actually thought if it had a prologue just to contextualize the three friends, that would have been okay. But it didn't even matter. Just like started off with the first, you know. And then I read in your publication about the twittering during the Raisin in the Sun and Clyburn Park. Did you guys know about that? There was a section where people could sit in Twitter. Did you Twitter?
I sat in the Twitter row and watched everybody else Twitter.
And how was it?
Because I wanted to see if they were actually paying attention to what was going on the stage.
And?
And a lot of them were frequently looking down into their laps, yeah. But
so do sleepers.
But they were restricted to the back row of the Kirk Douglas Theater. And so I don't think they were actually bothering anybody else in the audience, which would have been my chief concern.
I don't know. I have the same reaction to that as I do to the kid who walks into a show his mom made him come to wearing his iPod. You know, it's a distraction from the entire. I find theater to be such a totally physical experience that the idea that you would be distracting yourself by, I mean, it'd be like leaving the lights on so you could read the program the whole time. It's just, you're not going to be engaged. And if you're Bertolt Brecht, you're good with that. But if you're not, you're not. And I think that people who have decided that they're going to try and do two things at once are, you know, I mean, I can be a great multitasker with the best of them, but that's the one time I don't want to be.
But this is a new generation. It's like you have to, the physical ritual, like if they're not even paying attention, the physical ritual of getting the ticket, giving the ticket, finding the seat, and sitting there is already a first step. True. You know what I mean?
True.
And I actually think that like theater, you don't have to worry, sir. Theater is never going away. As long as there are humans, there will be theater. Yeah, and right now,
its death knell has been struck many, 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 many times, and somehow it keeps rising from the dead. So I think we're good.
Right.
We've tried to kill it off for centuries.
What, the critics?
The true
you?
role of the critic.
Yeah?
Kill theater. Dead.
But if it's the frame or the black box, it's like theater is happening everywhere now. Maybe the stage for theater, like the venue of stage is, you know, a little, I don't know. I actually have a dream of the Renaissance where people will actually crave, you know, getting away from their electronic proscenium of isolation and go sit next to human people and watch human people on stage and have that molecular exchange. I think that will actually be a craving in about like 2 years or something.
I'm craving us moving to the next question.
Yes,
We've got a question in the center, and then we're going to come to Michael. So the center first.
Oh, hi. Yes, thanks. And I think maybe it's a good segue for this talk about humans and the postmodern is that there were kind of three binaries that came up tonight. One being mean versus nice critics. One versus, you know, another being good or bad theater. Another being gettable theater versus not gettable theater. And in a room, as Mr. Morris said, of individuals, can someone speak to what gettability is? And God knows it's opposite, because I don't have any idea what that means.
I don't get your question.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I think there's a, you know, there's going to be stories that you will get. There are going to be stories that you will relate to, and there are stories that you won't. There are outcomes that you relate to, and there are outcomes that you believe, and there are outcomes that you don't. I mean, there's shows that I've gone to see, and I'm like, I don't get it. and that's when sometimes I go and I read, and I will read a review or a critique, and it will help elucidate that misunderstanding or that feeling of being lost. So, you know, and so that's why I respect the work of the critic, is because sometimes there are critics who will go and get it and will help me get it. Mm-hmm. And there's some critics who will come and see a show that I totally get and they're completely lost. It's because they have a completely different paradigm. So that's my understanding of getting it and not getting it, if that helps.
Yeah. I had a very, 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 very early in my career, I had a situation in which I saw a play that I was right out of college, you know, when you get everything because you're so cool. And I went to see this, a show that I thought was just fabulous. And it had absurdism, it had a lot of other things. I won't go into it all, but I was entranced. So I went home and wrote this really, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread kind of review. And that's another one of those times when I was accosted by people on the street. you know. I went to see that play because I read your review and I don't get it. Okay, so and it was a waste of my money. So it's one of those things where that the gettability obviously was different if you had more schooling in, you know, all the elitist schooling that one comes out of college with, and feel that you're sure that you get everything. But I think the job of a critic is, as best they can, to try and give something for people who are not as schooled in theater, at least from my perspective, from the people I write for, not as schooled as in theater, so a starting place, a place to grab a hold of, so that they can go in there with a mindset that will allow them to experience whatever the theatrical thing is in a way that will be able to speak to them, and to not expect everything to be linear. An awful lot of people still expect, I mean, blessings to Raisins in the Sun, but they expect, you know, beginning, middle, end, Raisin in the Sun. They don't even expect Waiting for Godot, much less some of the stuff I've seen, you know.
Waiting for Godot was a completely perplexing play in the middle of the century that nobody got. I mean, it didn't. And then Herbert Blau and Alan Mandel did that at the San Quentin Drama Workshop. They did it for prisoners. The least, like, no education, no literary background. They had not read James Joyce. They hardly knew who he was. And that play just took fire. They got it because they got what a prison was. And they got what, you know, what that kind of oppression, they got the scenes of the master-slave relationship. And it just landed on them, and so much of getting it really depends on what we've experienced and, you know, how it lands on our own personal chords, I guess, our nerve centers.
Eugene Ionesco, I think, sat in an empty theater watching Bald Soprano with his wife for 6 months in Paris.
Did he get it?
He got it, but I think I saw in the New York Fringe once a company out of Philadelphia called the Brat Theater Company. They did a 24-hour Bald Soprano. So, what's that? It's supposed to go on forever. Well, it's just, you know, every hour the actors would change being the guest or the host so that people could rest. But they did it for 24 hours, and I just remember seeing, it started at 8 p.m. like on a Friday night, but I went to like the midnight show, the 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and it was like, oh, this is a raucous, fun, kind of ribald party. And then by the 2 a.m. show, like the people from the Fringe were coming in. They had pillows all around. It was a completely black and white set. Everyone was in black and white. So it's like as their eyes were getting more bloodshot, you would see the bloodshot eyes against this monochrome. And then the workers of the Fringe would be kind of napping while the play was going on, 4 a.m., 5 a.m. And then I came back the next day, 5 p.m. for the last 3 shows, and they were so exhausted. All they were doing was just like finding moments to like drink water. And then what really hit, and this is when Ionesco finally made sense for me, being from the suburbs, it was like, oh, people would actually be napping until their line came up, and they would wake up, and they would say their line, and then they would go back to napping. I'm like, that's the suburbs, right? Everybody's asleep until they have to say something, and then they go back to sleep. And I'm like, I got it.
And following up on the timing piece, this is going to be our last question. I'm sorry. Great. So if we can get a microphone here. Your hand was up. Sorry.
So I have 10 questions, and I'm going to try.
You get one. Make it good.
I guess my question is, what do the people who create performing arts, so all the various artists that go in together to create that, what do they want from reviewers? Because we talked earlier about who your audience is, and you're writing for that audience, and hopefully in a way that's meaningful to them about it, without pandering to them. But what do artists want from reviewers?
Well, I wouldn't believe any artist who said that they, that they never read a review or never read it, because even though I don't necessarily read a review during the play, I always want to be liked. You want to be liked. You want people to come see your show. So I think there is, what you're asking from a reviewer is to have compassion and to have a knowledge of the work that goes into it, and to come in with a fresh eye. I mean, God bless them. They come in, they see how many shows a year, and we take the greatest thing from them, which is their time. And that's the thing that you can't give back. And so I think, them coming in and them being able to give a kind of explanation of what they saw with compassion and with what's the word, with a view of people coming to see it. I mean, you can't do a show without an audience. So it's about getting people to come in, and I don't know.
And on the subject of time and not being able to get it back.
I have just one last answer for this.
Please.
What they want is to be gotten plus.
Yeah.
Alice Tuan, challenging form, ladies and gentlemen. With a hat tip to the TED Talks, speed round, just what is your one wish for arts criticism in the LA theater community? Speed round, go.
Jesus.
Speechless critics, I love it.
To help define what LA is becoming also.
Ditto.
To have a place for it to be read.
To help encourage a sense of LA as a community.
Last word.
To keep talking and to keep leading and to keep leading each other. The community and the critics can keep moving forward together so for a larger purpose, to get the profile that you wanted.
That was more than one sentence.
Yeah, sorry.
So let's keep talking. Let's engage in conversation. Please fill out your surveys. Thank you all for being here. Help me join us thanking the panelists. Thank you.